Hello, welcome to The Conversation in News Central Television. This is a program where we bring you up to speed with all the political happenings on the African continent. I am Benga Aboroa.
And I am Rita Omodia. Today on The Conversation, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has officially confirmed that the upcoming Brics summit set to take place in the country next month will be held in person, defying the arrest warrant issued against Russian President Vladimir Putin. It is, however, still unclear if Putin will be attending the summit or not.
Meanwhile, Nigeria's President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has emerged chairman of the Authority of Heads of States and Government of the Economic Community of West Africa States, ECOWAS. Tinubu was elected as the 63rd ordinary session at the 63rd ordinary session of the regional bloc held on Sunday in Guinea-Bissau. Interesting developments.
Definitely, and I think congratulations are in order for President Bola Tinubu. This is the first time he's attending the summit, and he has already been elected as the leader of the Authority of Heads of State for ECOWAS. It's a good one.
Yes, but we also need to understand that it's not on. It was the turn of Nigeria to. It's a rotational presidency, so it's not like he did anything special. But I mean, still, it's a very important position, and he did say that he wants ECOWAS to stop being a toothless bulldog, because people criticize ECOWAS that the only time you see the effectiveness is when there's a coup and they come out to condemn it and then suspend the country, but they are not active. You look at a country like Burkina Faso, it's going through a lot of turmoil, and you ask, where's the ECOWAS support? Because what happens in Burkina Faso, for example, does have spillover effects in other West African states. So
yeah, you know, he talks about political stability and democracy, and, you know, looking at your country, Nigeria, where there are a lot of tribunals contesting your election. I mean, it's going to be a tough one for him. So it's mean like, before you also blame others.
Charity begins at home.
Very good, charity begins at home. Meanwhile, I mean, South Africa, I don't know what their plan is, but they're still saying that they will still have the summit physically, but the ICC is still there. So I don't know the backup plan that South Africa has if they want to have this continue as physical.
I guess we'll find out from our panelists during the discussion. So that brings us straight to South Africa, where South African President Cyril Ramaphosa made a significant announcement confirming that the upcoming Brics summit will be held in person, even with an active arrest warrant issued for Russian President Vladimir Putin by the International Criminal Court. Ramaphosa emphasized the importance of a physical meeting, stating that it had been nearly 3 years since the last in-person summit and that virtual options were not being considered. The decision to proceed with an in-person gathering raises questions about Putin's potential attendance and South Africa's stance on enforcing the International Criminal Court's warrant.
The situation presents a delicate predicament for South Africa, as it is an ICC member and would typically be expected to arrest Putin if he were to set foot in the country. However, the close ties between South Africa and the Kremlin, fostered during the anti-apartheid struggle years, complicate matters. South Africa has been cautious not to openly condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, asserting impartiality and a preference for dialogue. And joining us for this conversation, we have Dr. Godwin Ibe, the chairman, Nigerians in Diaspora Organization, Russia, joining us from Moscow. We also have Nsekilelo Breakfast, is a political analyst, joining us from Eastern Cape, also in South Africa. And we have Dr. Ongama Mtika, is a political analyst who joins us from South Africa. Gentlemen, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Good evening, your viewers.
Good evening. And I'm going to give it to you, Dr. Mtika. I mean, given the arrest warrant on the Russian President Vladimir Putin, how significant is it that South Africa is choosing to host the upcoming Brics summit in person instead of virtually? A lot of people would have said that they would opt for a virtual option than going physical. So how significant is it?
So there are two things here. Pretoria has had pressure to arrest Vladimir Putin, or to commit to arrest Vladimir Putin when it comes to South Africa. South Africa, it's the second time it's been put in a spot like this. It started with Omar al-Bashir in many years ago, when the country failed to arrest al-Bashir. At the time, his was a grand escape, which the South African government was accused of facilitating. In this time, if it failed to arrest Vladimir Putin, it would be seen as premeditated, especially if South Africa has actually sent an invitation to the Russian president to come. The issue, though, is that South Africa is engaged in battles which the governing party has outlined as, one, a shifting balance of power globally and the need for it to play a role in transforming international institutions to become a lot more rules-based. And South Africa's signatory of the Rome Statute was part of that international political agenda after having successfully ran an international campaign against apartheid. But in recent years, that principle of pushing for a rules-based international order has come against power dynamics where South Africa feels that implementing certain obligations, such as arresting a leader of a sovereign state who visits them, and part of a state that Pretoria has sympathetic relationships with, has proved to be a challenge. And I think that South Africa is aware of both the gaze of the international community who are pro-rules-based order, as well as its comrades, if one can put it that way, who are pushing for transformation in how the international community, balances between power and rules in enforcing international agreements and principles.
Now, Dr. Mtika, before I move to Dr. Godwin Ibe, I just want to ask you if the international community is truly, are they being truthful when it comes to international rule-based orders? Because we did see what happened when under the Trump presidency, when the International Criminal Court suggested they might look into American troops' behavior in Afghanistan. We've also seen the behavior of Israel when it comes to the treatment of Palestinians and also violating all sorts of United Nations laws and conventions. So is South Africa really obliged to go with this international rule-based orders that, can be broken at the whims and caprices of Western powers?
Indeed. So that's the issues. In fact, part of the debate in South Africa is that some of these countries who are proponents of, the International Criminal Court in particular, are not signatories to the Rome Statute, including the US. And indeed, you're quite right. It was the US that threatened to arrest the International Criminal Court judges when they threatened that they could look into war crimes committed by the administration in the US. So it's precisely that has called for so-called progressive forces in South Africa to say, you may want to acknowledge the fact that when it is superpowers that are involved, it's not just a question of complying with the law. And the South African laws have been the Rome Statute has been ratified in South Africa to comply with to be aligned with the domestic law. So it's not just a matter of the law, but also of national security and other strategic geopolitical issues. My view is that the South African government can be able to actually, make a case against enforcing the arrest on the basis of national security, which is in our constitution is regarded as the purview of the executive, and also it can make arguments about the anarchic nature of international affairs, in notwithstanding some attempts made at creating a rules-based order.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mtika. I'm going to bring Dr. Ibe into this conversation. And you're joining us from Moscow, the capital of Russia. We're sitting in a situation where South Africa is a signatory to the Rome Statute. We also look where they've been calling for the arrest of Russian President Vladimir Putin over a supposed aggression over Ukraine. What's your evaluation of the whole situation at hand and the fact that South Africa is supposed to arrest Putin if he ventures into coming to South Africa physically?
Well, national law, as we have seen in geopolitics, supersedes international agreements. And what my colleague has pointed to or highlighted is he said talked about rule-based order, but what it seems more like is like rule-based order actually means Western expectation-based relationship. Where what they expect, even though it's not agreed with you, nothing was signed. You are expected to follow a particular line of action. Obviously, it will be the height of foolishness for the head of the executive to disregard national interest because of the International Criminal Court that is functioning nowadays like Western criminal courts rather than International Criminal Court. Why? Why do I say this? Well, their location might give them out as a hint where the location of headquarters is, but like you rightly highlighted, the things in Afghanistan, we haven't seen anybody on arrest warrant. You also forgot, maybe didn't mention the atrocities, the massacre in Iraq by Blackwater private military contractors. It was so terrible that the U.S. judge had to sentence them to 30 years. We'll say 30 years, maybe it's not, it's a slap on the wrist, but at least the U.S. judge said, okay, you take 30 years. But Trump came, okay, give them a pardon. So we're just running around in circles. I don't think anybody expected them to spend 30 years in jail. That's just an additional example to the other examples you highlighted. I just don't want to go on and on about that. But you see that in geopolitics, it's not about good or bad. It's about your interest and about making decisions that go in line with your national, tactical, and strategic interest.
Dr. Ibe, sorry to interrupt you. Do you think President Vladimir Putin will attend? He has this posturing as a strong man, and if he doesn't appear in South Africa physically, it would look like, he chickened out and he bowed to Western pressure. What's the conversation like in Moscow in Russia as we speak? Is he likely to physically attend the summit next month?
Well, the South African president has given you hints, and let me tell you the hints. First of all, he said it will be a physical meeting. All members agree that it's a physical meeting. The second hint he gave is that discussions are at the final stages. The third hint he gave is that they prefer to see eyeball to eyeball. That's what he said, eyeball to eyeball. Now, I can also add that the president's movement is classified just like the president of any powerful nation or nuclear state. His travel plans are classified. But from what we are saying, if I speculate a little bit, I think the relationship with Africa, Russia-Africa relationship is held in the utmost regard. Here in Moscow, here in Russia, lots of events, lots of programs dedicated to this and to improving Russia-Africa relationship. So I think, and once again I repeat, I'm allowed to speculate. I think that the president of Russia wants to be there, and it's left for us to see if he'll be there or not. Of course, there are some other important announcements which also require him to be physical. The first one is the Brics currency, which has been announced, that's based on gold backed. And then the second thing is the joining of new members. About 41 members have officially applied, and we know the most likely candidates who most likely will be allowed if there's agreement among all parties. So these are very important two events which requires the presence of all heads of states.
Definitely. I'm going to bring Dr. Ntinka into this conversation. And it's not just Russia who is attending. I mean, we have Brazil, we have India, we have China, and it's supposed to take place in South Africa. What's the stance on the situation with Russia? I don't know if you have any indication. How do they feel about this Russia's president indictment, and him coming physically? Have they mentioned or given any statement to support South Africa if he actually ventures to come to South Africa? Dr. Ntinka, can you kindly unmute your device, please?
I thought you said Ntsikelelo, my colleague.
Okay.
So I missed your question.
Okay, I said we're looking at the other countries. I mean, in the BRICS summit, we have Brazil, India, China. What has been your stance so far on this indictment against Russia's President Vladimir Putin and his supposed physical appearance in South Africa?
Look, these countries are united in pushing for shifts in the global balance of power towards the East, and this new multilateral organization. And if anything, this increased interest by other countries in becoming part of BRICS vindicates their position that there should be a lot more multilateralism rather than a unipolar world. So in my understanding, in terms of what has been on record, is that these countries are, supporting South Africa, having all the members of the BRICS countries present here. And to that effect, Pretoria has promised to issue diplomatic immunity to those that are attending. We do see that the countries are not necessarily, moving away from relationships with Western Europe or the United States. We've seen recently, for example, closer relations between the US and India. They are not in attempting to shape a new balance of power, attempting to disassociate completely with Washington, while at the same time they are agitating for, new terms of relationship. We are hearing, for example, the confirmation that there are discussions that are at an advanced stage in creating a BRICS currency that's going to challenge the dominance of the US dollar. So here, Washington is rightly in panic mode about what these individual members have in mind as they strengthen their ties. But they are also keeping ties open with Washington, and as such, the only reason why there would be an overreaction perhaps from the US is seeing that their dominant position is being threatened, and the extent to which that is legitimate, to be concerned about a weakening of the dominance of the US. It's interesting from a moral perspective as to whether there is acceptance within Washington that there has to be a lot more equality, because it has tended to abuse its relationship with the countries of the world through coercive diplomacy. And the backlash that it is getting now is a result of people who don't want with Washington in that way.
Now, quickly, Dr. Mtiko, before we move to Dr. Ibe, I would like to know what the political situation is in South Africa regards to President Putin attending the summit. I remember speaking to the Premier of the Western Cape, Anna Winde. He did tell me that, if Putin steps into Western Cape, he would effect his arrest. I almost chuckled at that. There's also the EFF, Julius Malema, who has offered to personally provide security for the Russian president. So this is a divisive topic in South Africa. Are there political undertones to this, and will the ANC have its way? Having said that, we're going to grant all visitors diplomatic immunity. Will there be potential political backlash for that?
Not significantly, but there would be some backlash. Remember that South Africa is a constitutional democracy, so what the opposition doesn't have by way of numbers in parliament, it augments through litigation through the courts of law. So the Democratic Alliance has already threatened the ANC government that it would take it to court. And that's why the ANC government has proceeded with caution here. And I think that's why it's also pushed to have that peacekeeping mission to Russia and Ukraine, so that it can be able to also defend should it be challenged in the courts of law. Otherwise, politically, the majority of the political base in South Africa is pro the neutral stance that the ANC government is taking.
All right, now, Dr. Ibe, when Dr. Mintika was talking, he mentioned a situation that somehow painted as if the South Africa is being picked upon by the United States of America, because you see that there are also closer relations between India, United States, and even with other countries. I mean, you don't see them talking about the other countries there. So I wonder how threatened is US, the United States, or all the European nations about the BRICS summit, because we also see a situation where other countries now are venturing to join the BRICS, so it's not just going to be the 5 countries. So how strengthened is the BRICS, and how threatened are other European nations and the United States?
Yeah, it's a hot topic. It's a big deal. As you can see, so many countries, even France president
Wants to attend.
asked to be invited, and he was denied. And then after he was denied, he started speaking bad about BRICS and Russia. But what you should understand is that if you said the earth was round or a sphere, in a democratic country, there will still be people who believe that the earth is flat, and that is normal. But that is not what will be surprising. What will be surprising is that these little people will be amplified through the media. And whoever controls that media will try to amplify those very few people and make it look like it's the voice of God or the voice of the people. And that is what you're most likely going to see. It's clear that South Africa loves being in BRICS. It's clear that Africa wants to build improved relationship with Russia and other BRICS nations. That is pretty much clear. It is clear that China is the biggest lender to Africa. That is not under question. But when you begin to see lots of headlines telling you otherwise, you should just understand it's because of who controls a particular media, and then is able to push impressions and advertisements on the topic that he or she wants. But you should understand that also South Africa, while South Africa has a choice, South Africa also at the same time doesn't really have much of a choice because of the implications. Now, arresting the head of a nuclear state, you're opening a Pandora box. I mean, you are saying that, well, we can do the same for other G7 members and other heads of state if we're allied to them. Secondly, you're talking about the popularity of Putin's decisions. It's not the decisions taken so far by Putin are not Putin's decision, they are Russia's decision, because he has very, very high approval ratings, 80% or more. This is something that you can only dream of or wish to have by any politician in the West. It's 80%. It's agreed by both Eastern and Western publication. There is no argument over this, both in the Eastern and Western publication. And then you talk about the fact that all we mentioned before, the double standard multipolarity. So I wouldn't go further to speculate that the West knows quite well Russia's plans of attending. They have intelligence. I don't believe they don't know, but the truth is that there's nothing much they'll be able to do about it. They would, of course, the usual complaints and the usual filings and all of that, but it will come and it will go, whether Putin attends or not. The plans that are in place will go smoothly and will end just with a little bit of talks and publications.
So it seems, Dr. Ibe, it seems Russia is not as isolated as they want us to believe, if it's still having close ties. Or that they want, exactly.
Oh, absolutely not. There was a publication on Political saying that just about 9% or 10% of EU companies left Russia. You can see that Russia returned to the top 10 nations in terms of, I think, GDP per capita or GDP. But one of these stats, you can see some improvement. Of course, there's the inflation, which is of a global nature, not a Russian nature. In fact, the thing about the BRICS countries is that they are countries that have some kind of level of independence. They tend to be able to withstand sanctions and to be able to have an opinion in global discussions. This is one of the reasons why even little countries, if they apply, the application will not be considered very seriously, because to be in BRICS, you have to believe in some ideas of your opinion needs to be strong. You have to believe in multipolarity. People have to they don't need to like you, but they need to always be listening carefully to what you say, because they understand the implications of your words. And these are the kind of nations that you find in BRICS, and it's not just for any Tom, Dick, and Harry. So that's why you also see it reflected in the membership out of the 41 applications.
Yeah, Dr. Ibe, they seem to be even more tolerant of other opinions? Because, for example, if you see what happened, you did emphasize on the media and the narrative. Russia today has been kicked out of London and Washington. So, I mean, it says it tells you a lot. Yes.
I can tell you from my personal experience and other experience, but what I would say is that, yes, because of the pressure and the weaponization of financial instruments, even being just neutral is enough for Russia. You don't even need to say, "Oh, I love Russia." Just saying you sort yourself out. That's even enough.
And that's why they're clamoring for other African countries to not just take a neutral stance, but actually side Ukraine. Dr. Tika, let's allow you have the final take. I mean, we're having the Brics summit next month. Is there a possibility that this will serve as an opportunity for diplomatic discussions and potential resolution of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine? I know we saw African delegation, but is there possible discussion at the Brics summit?
It is possible in the sense that many African countries have made their voices heard as far as the impact of this conflict on on the continent. But also, Putin is the kind of leader who wants to be seen to be in control of decisions he makes. So I doubt that he's going to want to come across as a leader who was convinced by external parties to take a particular stance. But domestically, the political situation he is facing around Prigozhin, for example, that Prigozhin rebellion, does sort of weaken him a little bit. So I do think that part of what may be happening in Moscow is a search for a more strategic exit or a reduction of hostilities in Ukraine. And I think that the African leaders have provided Moscow with a path out of this, which doesn't appear as though acceding to Western interests. So I think that a good process has been started. I've seen, for example, the Senegalese president recently, because there's a China-Africa summit also coming. Yeah. And I think that that's going to also help create this necessary momentum from allies of Russia that may actually present an alternative to ceasing hostilities. Okay. That's a lot more dignified for Moscow.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. There's also a Russia-Africa Economic Summit taking place in St. Petersburg, I believe, next week. Thank you, Dr. Godwin Ibe, Chairman, Nigerians in Diaspora Organization at Russia, and also Dr. Ogama Ntika. It was a pleasure speaking with you, gentlemen. Thanks for your time and your insight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're watching News Central Television. This is The Conversation. Coming up on the program, Tinubu appointed chairman of ECOWAS will bring you the implications of this decision when we return. Do stay with us.